on. Cool, we should be good to go. Back in action. All right. So fear of God is a particular way of seeing the world and one's place in it. That we recognize that God has the ultimate power and authority over all things, that he is the strong one, that he is the good one, that he is the loving one. He is the height of all of these things. But that we also know our place in it. And simply put, I like to think of it this way. All of those things that God is, we ain't. We are meant to be, and we contain some element of, but we're not them in the fullness or in the way that God is them. And so we are in a position of frailty, we're in a position of need, and we're in a position of dependence. That the fear of God recognizes our position in relationship to the divines. And so it's a recognition of our status in the universe and that Yahweh is the absolute authority. And so this recognition of frailty, need, and dependence comes from the fear. This knowledge of authority, it comes from the love of God. So like the more we know who God is, the more we will want to know him and be in relationship with him, i.e. fear him. And with this belief is that Yahweh can and will do all that he has promised. And this worked for them in the Old Testament, and it works for us here in 2020. That because of our knowledge of God, because of our intimacy with God, we believe what God has done on our behalf in the past is a foretaste of what God will do for us in the future. And this comes with the fear of God. And any Israelite who did not fear God or feared something more than God inevitably displayed faithlessness to Yahweh. So why? And this is where you usually see the, hey, do not be afraid, or the fear nots. Why is that the case? Because this was not about emotions. This was not about a sense of terror. Instead, this was about loyalty. This was about recognizing, how did we phrase it earlier? Recognizing the absolute authority in the world. And so if something came along that stole that allegiance from you, that became a problem. Because then you began to live for or towards this thing that you thought was stronger than God. And so we see this with idolatry very easily. If you think another God is stronger than your God, then you would be afraid of that God and you would no longer fear Yahweh, and you would switch deities. This is very much what's happening in the story of David and Goliath. David, among all of the Israelites, fears God and does not fear Goliath because he believes that their deities are fighting on one another's behalf. And he believes that his deity is going to win. Simple as that. So this is part of the problem. So we see a really good illustration of this in Exodus. I won't read the whole story, but this is the crossing of the Red Sea. In Exodus chapter 14, verses 10, 13, and 31. You can jot those down and check them out later. I would put them all on the screen, but they don't fit. So in Exodus chapter 14, verse 10, when Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. So we see God's people are in a situation where something is coming against them. It seems like it's definitely something that's way bigger, way stronger, way more powerful than they are. It's going to overcome them. It's going to overtake them. What do? They cry out to God in fear, but not fear of God, fear of the Egyptians. Skip ahead to verse 13. Moses says to the people, do not be afraid. He's not saying, hey guys, I know you have this emotion right now. I need you to go ahead and flip that off. What he's saying is, don't fear the Egyptians, fear God. Don't pay allegiance to the Egyptians, pay allegiance to God. Don't be worried that the Egyptians are going to overthrow you. Look to God, because God is ultimately the strong one here. Fear not, stand firm, and see for yourselves the salvation of Yahweh, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. This thing that you fear, that you feel like is daunting, that you feel like is going to overtake and overcome you and end you, this thing that you fear will one day never be again. We find ourselves in a very, very similar situation, don't we? We're standing on the edge of the sea, and we see this army bearing down on us, this thing that we seem to have little control or knowledge of, this thing that seems bigger than us and quickly overwhelming us and overtaking us. And what God is saying to us here is, do not fear that, fear me, because I've made you a promise. I made you a promise 2,000 years ago on Good Friday that death will die, that darkness does not get to win, that in the end all sin and evil will be conquered. The thing that you fear right now, the thing that you see, the thing that you can't stop thinking about or worrying about, watch the salvation of the Lord, because that thing will one day no longer be. You will not see that thing again. Let's skip ahead to verse 31. The sea opens up. It swallows Pharaoh's army. And Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord. They believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. So, some takeaways from this. We're to fear God above all else. This is not about what you feel. This is not about anxiety or emotion. Emotions play a part of it, and feelings play a part of it, but this is about allegiance, and this is about faith. We are to acknowledge both the authority of God over all things and the love of God for us in particular. When you feel overcome and you feel overwhelmed, do you know that God loves you? Do you know who God is? Do you know what he's like? He's good. He's all powerful. And he cares about you as a person individually. He cares about me. With that, we begin to worry about the circumstances. If we can focus on that, it begins to fade away. COVID-19 is as big of an enemy as it feels right now. We begin to understand and see like, oh yeah, this will pass as well. That God loves us and he cares about us and he has power even over that he will overcome and be victorious. So we know that circumstances will shake us and that this is normal, and it's okay for us to have normal emotional reactions to our circumstances. The command to fear not is not a command to not be concerned with our circumstances. Just throw your hands up. It's no big deal. It'll all be fine. That's not what it means. But instead, it's a command to gaze at the one who has ultimate authority, remember his care and concern for you, and remember the promise of Calvary. Death does not win. That even when the circumstances get really bad,